Hello everyone, welcome to ElToroRyan. Today I will be doing my first ever park review, which will be of Six Flags Mexico in Mexico City, which I will be basing off of my visit on February 14th of 2019. For my park reviews, I won't be using a ranking or a 1 to 10 scale, but rather a recommendation, and I will be giving my observations and my opinion on certain things I noticed or saw in the park. And with all that said, let's get on with the review. To begin the review, I'll take you through my day at Six Flags Mexico. I actually arrived at the park around 1 p.m., and because of the off-season, the park was only open until 6. I knew this in advance. My family and I saw that the lines were an hour and a half to 2 hours and a half long, so we got the flash passes. After this, we went to ride Superman El Último Escape, and then I noticed two things. One, the beginning of the queue line for Superman actually had pretty decent theming and looked like the inside of the Daily Planet building from the comics. And two, the park was a popular place for couples to go on Valentine's Day, as we saw a lot of them. This also led me to believe that the park was more crowded than usual for an off-season weekday, though the park wasn't really packed or anything. After waiting 20 minutes, I got my first ride in the back row on Superman El Último Escape, and it blew me away completely. Coming in to ride Superman, I had heard mostly that this coaster was just a decent hyper and nothing special. Although right before my trip, I had heard that Superman was a world-class coaster, but I didn't expect it to live up to that standard, so I was actually pretty surprised when I ended up liking it a lot more than I had expected, and I did indeed think that it was a world-class coaster, and that was just a memorable moment of being just completely surprised. After this, I went to walk over to Medusa Steel, and I decided to get a picture of Porky Pig. I don't know exactly why I did this, but after the picture was taken, someone accidentally ran into or hit Porky in the back of his head, and the most bizarre yet funny sound came out of it. It was just kind of a bonk sound, and it was a memorable moment for sure. It was just kind of a weird kind of moment, but definitely one I remember. I then went to Medusa Steel Coaster, which had a very funky queue line with slanted switchbacks and old western theming, which I didn't expect, but it was pretty awesome. Then of course I went to the station and noticed something disappointing. The last car in Medusa wasn't on the train, meaning I wouldn't experience Medusa to the fullest. So with lowered expectations, I rode Medusa Steel, and it exceeded my expectations, as it did everything you'd want a coaster to do amazingly, and I instantly knew I preferred it over Twisted Colossus, the only other RMC I had ridden at the time. After some rewrites on Medusa and getting food, I realized that many of the staff barely knew English, and that there were not too many signs that were in English, which I thought was interesting. After eating and walking around for a bit, I went to ride the Joker, which I rode as Pandemonium back when it was at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom, so it was really fun to see it again, and of course ride it. And this ride also had a crazy queue line that was a fun house and has tons of surprises, and is honestly almost as fun as the ride itself. The Joker itself was fun, intense, and even had some airtime, but it was a tad rougher than I remembered. After that, I got another ride in on Superman El Último Escape, and on this ride, I was talking to two guys in front of me who were locals and about my age, and they seemed surprised to hear that I was from California, and we were just talking about Medusa and Superman. They weren't enthusiasts, but they had visited the park at least a few times, so it was cool to talk to them, and that was a fun memory, along with, of course, another terrific ride on Superman. After Superman, I walked around the whole park and tried the ride Wonder Woman, but the wait was over 30 minutes, and Flash Pass didn't work yet for Wonder Woman, so I passed up on the opportunity, and instead rode Tsunami, the family coaster, which was my 70th coaster credit, and it was a decent ride. It was a bit rough, but the rock work was cool, and the trains were reminiscent of the new Texas Giant, with how there were windows on the sides. After this, the park was almost closing and we left, and I was satisfied with the day I had at the park. Though I only rode 4 coasters, I got multiple rides on the top 2, which was what I wanted. Now I'll begin my more critical part of the review with the park appearance, and Six Flags Mexico is a nice looking park for sure, and easily the best looking of the 3 Six Flags parks I've been to. The fountains look nice, and the Mexican style buildings, which are quite colorful, are pleasing to look at, and both of these help give Six Flags Mexico a pretty nice and good atmosphere. There is still some advertisements here and there, but it doesn't feel too excessive. The park is also quite clean, and the restrooms were maintained well also. The food options, from what I saw, is pretty similar to other Six Flags parks. You have burgers, chopsticks, and American food, but the thing that made the food options stand out here was because this was in Mexico City, there were actually some pretty good and relatively authentic Mexican food options. My dad had a gringa and said it was pretty good and the best food he had had at any of the Six Flags parks. And my mother enjoyed the stuffed churro, saying it was a great dessert. So Six Flags Mexico does pretty well with their food options, which is, in my opinion, well above the average for Six Flags standards, as well as its overall appearance, as I also think that it is quite a bit above normal Six Flags standards. Now for the roller coaster collection, at Six Flags Mexico, the coaster collection consists of many clone coaster models that you would find at other parks, and some of which are fun, like the Joker, which is a Gerstlauer spinning coaster, while others are not so great, like Tsunami and Batman the Ride. The two standout coasters at the park are Superman El Último Escape, a Morgan hybrid coaster with a unique layout, and Medusa Steel, which is a RMC hybrid. These two coasters are so awesome, but so different at the same time, and they were just really good. My favorite coasters at the park were Joker, which has an awesome queue line and is somewhat intense despite being a family coaster. Superman, as I mentioned earlier, which is a world-class hybrid coaster with incredible ejector airtime, good pacing, and great intensity throughout the whole ride, but it does have a few rough spots. And Medusa Steel, which is an incredible coaster that is very smooth, paced almost to perfection, and it gives terrific airtime and some solid hang time with the inversions. In my opinion, while the overall coaster collection may seem unimpressive, the top two definitely makes up for that and makes Six Flags Mexico a must visit if you are a coaster enthusiast that is in or visiting Mexico City. Now, one area that I saw Six Flags Mexico struggle in was the operations. They were definitely a weakness for this park when I visited. Multiple coasters were only running one train, including Superman and Medusa Steel. This made it so that there were very long lines, some of which got to around an hour and a half to 2 hours and a half long, as I mentioned earlier. The dispatch times were fine, about 50 to 120 seconds, but it didn't help much since, as I mentioned earlier, they were running only one train. As I mentioned earlier, I did visit in their off-season, which might explain this, and if you visit when there are slow operations or in the off-season, I would highly advise you get a flash pass, as it is likely one of the only ways you can get as many rides in as you want. And it costs a price equivalent to $20 per person, at least that's how much it was when I was there. And how the Six Flags Mexico flash pass works is a bit different than most other Six Flags parks. For their $20 Platinum Pass, you go all the way up into the station and wait from there, and you can use the pass 9 times on any ride you want, and the 10th one you can use only on Justice League Battle for Metropolis, so the Fast Pass system is similar to Fastlane at Cedar Fair parks, except you get limited rides, and it is a hole punch system. Also, if you go with multiple people and everyone gets the flash passes, even though you know that certain party members won't use it all up, that is fine because you can actually trade around your passes without any issues, since the park has no way of knowing whose pass is whose. With that said, when I went, I still had to wait up to 25 minutes with the flash pass, as the one train ops really affected the station waits, but it was still far better than waiting 2.5 hours. So if you go during the off season, definitely get the flash pass. This park also has a pretty great location, as it is in Mexico City, which I think is a really awesome city to visit. For other amusement parks, you don't really have much. The only major one nearby is La Feria, which I did not visit, but if you like to visit other tourist attractions, especially historical ones, then you're in luck, as not too far away from Mexico City, there are the Teotihuacan pyramids, and in Mexico City there are some impressive churches and basilicas, as well as ruins in the downtown area, and of course there's the National Museum of Anthropology, which is absolutely amazing. I'll have a more in-depth video on the other attractions in Mexico City, but just know that there's plenty to do while you are in Mexico City, and the tourist parts of the city are indeed very safe, and Uber is a pretty good option to use to get around the city. Overall, Six Flags Mexico was a really cool park to visit, and to me, if you look at the non-coaster and ride aspects of the park, I think I like Six Flags Mexico the best out of the 3 Six Flags parks I've been to. At some areas in the park, I felt like I was at a park unlike anything else. In others, I definitely felt like I was at a Six Flags park, which made things pretty interesting. The food of the park was great. The park looked nice. It was clean. Some of the theming was crazy, especially in the queue lines. And the top 2 coasters of the park were pretty amazing. So I would definitely recommend visiting this park if you are in Mexico City. If you're a coaster enthusiast, or you just like amusement parks and want to do something fun. But would I recommend going way out of your way to go there if you live in a country besides Mexico? Well, no. At least if you're just talking about Six Flags Mexico itself. But along with visiting the other incredible places in Mexico City, it is absolutely worth doing. Thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for more park and coaster related content, and of course my overview video of Mexico City here on Coaster Hour.